Get her out of my mess hall. Ryan Cole didn't even look up from his food when he said it, just pointed at the door like she was garbage someone had tracked in off the street. Then he stood up, walked straight to her, and ripped the transfer papers out of her hands, ripped them, tore the folder clean in half, and threw the pieces at her feet. "You don't belong here," he said loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You've never belonged anywhere near a uniform." 300 soldiers laughed. She looked down at the papers on the floor. Then she looked up at him, and something behind her eyes went very, very quiet. If you're new here, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that mess hall because what happened next changed everything. The storm had been building over Fort Blackridge since late afternoon. By 7 o'clock that Friday evening, the Texas sky had turned the color of a bruised deep purple and swollen gray, and the wind outside rattled the corrugated walls of the base's main mess hall like something was trying to get in. Inside, though, nobody cared about the weather. The mess hall at Fort Blackridge was its own kind of storm. It always was on Friday nights after a full week of training exercises. The men were loud, sweaty, half-drunk on adrenaline and exhaustion, and absolutely convinced that they owned every square inch of that building. There were maybe 300 soldiers packed in there that evening. Long metal tables lined with trays of food, the air thick with the smell of industrial cooking and boot leather. Some men were eating. Some were telling war stories that grew bigger with every retelling. Others were playing cards in the corner or watching highlights on somebody's phone propped against a salt shaker, arguing about teams and scores and which units would crush, which in next month's field competition. It was loud, arrogant, alive in the way that only a room full of people who trained to survive could be. Sergeant First Class Ryan Cole sat at the center table because Ryan Cole always sat at the center table and everybody knew it. That table was his, not assigned, not designated, just understood. The way a lot of things were understood at Fort Blackridge, through an unspoken system of dominance that Ryan had spent 4 years carefully constructing around himself like armor. Ryan was 34 years old, barrel-chested with a jaw like a concrete block, and eyes that had the kind of flat confidence that comes not from wisdom, but from never having been truly challenged. He was a decorated infantry leader, respected by his superiors for results, feared by younger recruits for his methods. He wasn't cruel in a way that ever got him officially reported. He was cruel in the way that systems allow the kind that gets called toughening up and building character. And that's just how the military works. He was in the middle of a story about a field exercise in Georgia, leaning back with one boot propped up on the bench when the mess hall doors opened. The sound of the storm rushed in for just a second. Then the doors closed again. And there she was. She was small. That was the first thing anyone noticed. 5'4", maybe 5'5", slight enough that the military-issue jacket she wore looked like it belonged to someone else entirely. Her hair was blonde, pulled back in a simple bun, a few strands escaping at the sides. Her face was, and this was the word that Private Lucas Reed would use later when he tried to describe it to someone composed. Not nervous, not eager. Not the way you look when you're new somewhere and trying to make a good impression. Composed. The way a person looks when they've walked into hundreds of rooms and long since stopped caring what any of them thought of her. She carried a thin folder of documents against her chest. Transfer papers. Her eyes moved across the room with the kind of deliberate, unhurried scan that most people wouldn't even notice. Quick check of the exits assessment of the layout catalog of the faces, and then she started walking toward the duty desk near the far wall. She made it about 12 steps. "Hey!" Ryan's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Not loud exactly, just placed with absolute precision into the acoustic center of the room. She stopped. Slowly she turned. Ryan was already standing. He'd picked up her transfer folder from where she'd set it on the edge of a nearby table when she reached for a pen, moved so quickly, so casually that it barely registered as something deliberate. He was holding it now, flipping it open with one thick finger, scanning the page with the exaggerated skepticism of a man performing for an audience. And that audience was watching. "Emily Carter," he read aloud. Then he paused. Let the name sit there. "Huh." He looked up. Looked her over head to toe the way you look at something that doesn't belong in a room. "You lost, ma'am." Quiet laughter from the nearby tables. A few heads turned, then more. The way attention travels in a crowd like electricity finding the fastest path. "I'm reporting to Fort Blackridge," she said. Her voice was even, measured, the kind of voice that doesn't go up at the end of sentences. "Transfer orders, as you can see. I'm looking for the duty officer." "Transfer orders." Ryan repeated it like the concept was foreign to him. He held the folder up, showing it to the men at his table like it was something exotic. "Gentlemen, we have official transfer orders here. Says she belongs on this base." He shook his head slowly. "Says a lot of things." "May I have those back, please," she said. Not a question, not quite a demand, something in between. Ryan didn't give them back. "How'd you get here?" he asked. "Civilian cab? Maybe a nice Uber from the airport." He grinned at his own joke. "Because you look, and I say this with the utmost professional respect, like you've never seen the inside of a military base in your life." The laughter got louder. Someone at a table near the back shouted something. Phones came out, not all at once, but one, then two, then a cluster of them screens tilted toward her. She stood very still. Her hands, Lucas noticed, trembled once. A small, nearly invisible tremor there, and gone so quickly he wasn't sure he had actually seen it. But it was there, like a single ripple crossing still water. And then her eyes did something strange. They moved, quietly, systematically. Not at Ryan, not at the phones, not at the laughing soldiers. At the exits. Door behind her already logged. Door to the kitchen on the left checked. Emergency exit on the far right, half blocked by a folding equipment cart noted. Windows above the east wall measured and categorized. All of it in under 4 seconds. Lucas Reed saw it happen. He was sitting alone at the end of the third table from the left, pushing green beans around his tray, a 22-year-old private from Savannah who had been at Fort Blackridge for 6 months and had never once managed to make himself invisible enough that nobody bothered him. He watched the whole thing, the arrival, the mockery, the trembling hands, the eyes. He put down his fork. In the far corner of the mess hall, away from the main crowd, a man in civilian clothes sat with a cup of coffee and a tablet computer, watching everything with the quiet, still attention of someone who had trained himself never to look like he was watching anything at all. His name was Captain Nathan Hayes, intelligence officer. He had been embedded at Fort Blackridge for 11 days under the cover of a logistics review, and in 11 days he had learned exactly 2 useful things: that this base had a serious culture problem, and that somewhere inside it, someone was feeding classified information to people who were not supposed to have it. He had not learned who. When the doors opened and Emily Carter walked in, Nathan had barely glanced up from his tablet. But when Ryan started talking, Nathan watched. And the more he watched her, the stillness, the measured breathing, the systematic environmental scan disguised as a blank stare, the colder he felt, because he knew what that looked like. He'd trained with people who did that, people who had been through programs that didn't appear on any publicly accessible military record, people whose first instinct in every unfamiliar room was not social orientation, but tactical assessment. His coffee sat untouched. Back at the center of the room, Ryan had crossed his arms and was performing for the crowd with the confidence of a man who had never once miscalculated the room's mood. "Here's what I'm going to do," he announced. "Since we're a welcoming installation, and since Ms. Carter here has official papers, which I'm sure are completely legitimate, I'm going to give her a proper Fort Blackridge welcome." He turned to his table. "Monroe, you heard me. Come on up." Lieutenant Jessica Monroe rose from her seat like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. She was Ryan's mirror, in a lot of ways sharp, status-obsessed, with a way of entering a conflict that made it feel like she'd been there first. She was also a talented officer, something she had long since weaponized against anyone she perceived as competition. She walked over to Emily with the measured pace of someone who wanted the walk itself to make a statement. "So," Jessica said, "transfer papers. What unit?" "Classified," Emily replied. The word landed like a coin dropped in a very quiet room. Jessica blinked, then smiled. "Classified." She looked at Ryan, then back at Emily. "Okay, what's your MOS?" "Classified." Ryan stepped forward. "Ma'am, I don't know what civilian training program sent you out here." "I didn't come from a civilian training program," Emily said. "Then where did you come from?" A pause. Not a nervous pause, an evaluating one. "I came from a place you've never heard of," she said. Because that's the point. The room did not laugh this time. Something had shifted in the atmosphere subtly, like a barometric pressure drop before a storm, the kind of shift that animals feel before humans notice. Ryan felt it and didn't like it. He turned to the room, reclaiming the energy. All right, fine, classified. Sure, you know what? Let's see the basics then. You're at a military installation. You claim to have orders. You claim some kind of service background. He gestured broadly. So let's see it. Drill positions. Basic. It was a public humiliation disguised as a test. Everyone understood that, including Emily. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, okay. She handed her folder to Lucas. Lucas specifically, the one person in the room who hadn't laughed, and she stepped forward into the open space between the tables. Ryan called the first position. She moved, and the room changed. There was nothing theatrical about how she did it. No showmanship, no attempt to impress. She simply executed every command with the kind of precision that didn't come from training. It came from the place training eventually reaches if you survive long enough. The place where it stops being learned and becomes instinct, becomes bone. The room got quieter with each position. Ryan called them faster, trying to catch her. She never hesitated, never adjusted, never second-guessed a single movement. A specialist near the back lowered his phone, then the man next to him. Ryan changed tactics. He grabbed a standard-issue M17 pistol from the hip of a nearby armorer, proper protocol cleared and safe, and set it on the table in front of her. Field strip it, he said. Clock starts now. She looked at the weapon, then at Ryan, then she picked it up. What happened in the next 41 seconds was, by all later accounts, one of the most disorienting things most of those soldiers had ever witnessed in a mess hall or anywhere else. She disassembled the weapon with a speed that was almost uncomfortable to watch. Not frantic, not showy, but systematic, with such deep efficiency that it looked almost slow until you realized how much she had accomplished. Every piece separated and placed in exact order. Then, before anyone had fully registered what they were looking at, the pieces were moving back together and the weapon was whole again in her hands. She set it back on the table. 41 seconds. The room was silent. Private Danny Kowalski, a weapons specialist who had been with the 82nd Airborne for 6 years, leaned over to the man beside him and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "That's faster than I do it." Ryan stared at the pistol. Jessica Monroe, who had been standing to the side with her arms crossed and her expression carefully neutral, had a look on her face that she couldn't quite control, something between fascination and the very first edge of unease. "That could be practiced," Ryan said. His voice was still even. "Party trick." "What would you like next?" Emily asked. It was the calmness that was doing it. Not the skill. The skill was extraordinary, yes, but skills could be explained. The calmness was something else. She stood there in the middle of a mess hall with 300 people watching her and phones recording, and a man trying systematically to humiliate her, and she looked like she was running a low-priority errand. Like this entire situation registered somewhere around the bottom third of the most challenging things she'd faced in recent memory. Lucas was watching her hands, still again. Whatever that small tremor had been at the beginning, it was completely gone now. He thought about that. He thought about it very carefully. That tremor had been there when she walked in, before the test, before she had to prove anything, and now that she was in the middle of it, being watched and challenged and recorded, the tremor was gone. Normal people work the opposite way. In the far corner, Nathan Hayes had set down his tablet. He was no longer pretending to work. He was watching Emily Carter with the concentrated attention of a man trying to solve a problem that doesn't add up, and the harder he looked, the less it added up. He pulled out his phone, opened a secure app, typed in a name, Emily Carter. Fort Blackridge transfer, military records query. He waited. The little spinning icon turned, and then nothing. Not no records found, not insufficient clearance, not the standard wall of redaction that classified files returned. The screen went blank. Then a single line of text appeared. Red background, white letters. A classification marker Nathan had seen exactly once before in his career during a briefing he was told, and afterward, never happened. Level Omega operator detected. Access denied, federal authorization required. Nathan slowly set his phone face down on the table. His pulse had jumped. He breathed through it, made his face neutral, picked up his coffee cup and held it so his hands had something to do. Level Omega, he had heard that term exactly once. In a classified briefing 3 years ago delivered by a man whose name he had never been told and whose face he had not been allowed to look directly at for more than 4 consecutive seconds because of the psychological pressure protocol the program apparently required. Level Omega was not a security clearance. It was a status designation, assigned to a category of operators so deeply embedded in black-tier programs that their records were not merely classified, they were architecturally separated from the entire military database infrastructure. You couldn't search for them. You couldn't find them. The only way their existence was ever confirmed was when the system itself reacted to protect them, which was what had just happened. On his phone, in the mess hall of Fort Blackridge, Texas, where Sergeant First Class Ryan Cole was now escalating his humiliation campaign against a small blonde woman who had just stripped and reassembled a pistol in 41 seconds without blinking. Nathan looked at the back of Emily Carter's head. He thought, "Who are you?" And then almost immediately, "What are you doing here?" Because operators at that level didn't walk into military mess halls by accident. They didn't get lost. They didn't take wrong turns. They didn't show up with transfer papers they could have had delivered by secure courier. They showed up in person when they needed to see something with their own eyes, which meant Emily Carter was here on purpose, which meant everything happening in this mess hall right now was being observed, cataloged, evaluated. Ryan was still going. He had pulled 3 more soldiers into the assessment, now a medic, a tactical navigation specialist, and a close-quarters combat instructor named Staff Sergeant Darren Webb, who had never once in 4 years at this base lost a hand-to-hand demonstration to anyone for any reason. Each of them was going to test Emily in their specific field. He was going to break this down until something cracked. The medic set up a field trauma scenario, the kind used in combat skill evaluations. The wound description was read aloud. The tools were placed on the table. Emily worked the scenario with both hands, narrating her process as she went, not to show off, but because she was clearly so comfortable with the procedure that explaining it and doing it simultaneously was just how it worked for her. She identified 3 complications the medic hadn't included in the scenario setup, but were realistic based on the described injury mechanism. She addressed them in order of severity without being asked. When she finished, the medic stood back, cleared his throat, said nothing. Ryan moved immediately to navigation. She read the topographic map without orienting it to her position first, which meant she was processing it purely from memory of terrain rather than from a physical reference point. She identified the fastest extraction route and then unprompted identified 2 secondary routes and explained exactly which environmental conditions would make each of them preferable. The navigation specialist turned to Ryan and opened his mouth. Ryan cut him off with a look. Darren Webb stepped forward. Close quarters was different. You couldn't do that with charts and field kits. You had to move, and Ryan was counting on that, on the physical reality of her size in a combat context. Darren was 6'2" and built like he'd been assembled for exactly this purpose. But Emily looked at him when he stepped forward, and something happened that several soldiers would talk about later, but none could quite explain accurately. She looked at him the way you look at a math problem. Not a threat, a problem, something to be solved. Darren stopped before he even started the demonstration. He cleared his throat. "I'd need safety mats and a full protocol agreement before any physical contact evaluation," he said. His voice was careful, professional. He was not a man who offered careful and professional explanations for stopping things before they started. Ryan stared at him. Darren met his eyes steadily and said nothing else. And that was when Lieutenant Jessica Monroe, who had been standing off to the side running her own quiet calculations, said in a voice that carried clearly across the room, "This isn't right." Ryan turned to her. Jessica was looking at Emily, and the look on her face had completed its transformation from contemptuous to something considerably more complicated. "This isn't a skills assessment," she said. "This is a sideshow." She paused. "And she's passing it." "Monroe," Ryan said. "She's passing everything, Ryan." Jessica's voice was flat, not sympathetic to Emily exactly. More like a person recalibrating to new data in real time and not being willing to pretend they hadn't. "Whatever point you were trying to make, you're not making it." The room heard every word. Lucas Reed was still holding Emily's transfer folder. He looked down at it. The documents inside told him almost nothing. Her name, a base assignment code, A unit designation that when he tried to mentally cross-reference it against anything he'd ever heard of, connected to absolutely nothing. No unit designation he had ever seen, no format he recognized. He looked up at her. She was looking back at him. Not with warmth exactly. Not with the manufactured kindness of someone trying to win an ally, but with something, a directness, a recognition that made him feel for no reason he could fully articulate, like he was the only person in that room she had actually decided to see. "Thank you for holding those," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." Lucas blinked. Yeah, of course. "What's your name?" "Reed. Private Lucas Reed." She nodded once, like she was filing it. Ryan had collected himself. He looked at the soldiers around the room, at the phones still out, at the faces that had changed from amused to uncertain, and he recalculated. He wasn't done. He had one more move, and he was going to make it because Ryan Cole had never in 4 years on this base walked away from a public confrontation without winning it, and he wasn't starting tonight. He looked at Emily. "Full inspection," he said. His voice was quiet now, almost pleasant, which to the people who knew him well was the most dangerous sign of all. Colonel David Mercer, who had been standing near the duty desk for the past 86 minutes trying to find the right moment to intervene, took a step forward. "Sergeant." "Full inspection, Colonel," Ryan repeated, and there was something in his voice that was not insubordination, but was the precise millimeter from it. "Standard protocol for any incoming transfer. We need to verify the complete uniform and equipment." He looked at Emily. "Everything." The room understood what he meant. Mercer said, "Ryan, that's enough. It's protocol, sir. It's not the time or place." "She can refuse," Ryan said simply. "That's always an option. She can refuse, and we can note the refusal on her transfer intake." The room was very still. Emily stood in the center of it. The storm outside pressed against the walls. The emergency lights above the kitchen door flickered once in a power surge and then steadied. Colonel Mercer looked at Emily, and something passed across his face, not quite apology, not quite warning, something in between. Emily looked at Ryan, and then she said quietly and clearly the words that would be repeated by everyone in that room for the rest of their careers. "Okay, Sergeant." She took hold of the bottom hem of her shirt, and the room held its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ryan stood with his arms crossed and his chin slightly raised, braced for whatever minor embarrassment was about to play out. Some birthmark, some scar, some personal physical reality he could twist into another few minutes of theater. Emily pulled her shirt up, and the room stopped. Not quieted, stopped. Because covering her back from the top of her shoulder blades to the base of her spine was a tattoo unlike anything most of them had ever seen outside of a museum or a military history file. A massive black dragon rendered in extraordinary detail, scaled and ancient and terrible, with its wings spread across the full width of her back and its tail coiling down toward her left hip. But it was not the dragon itself that caused the silence. It was the silver flames. Woven through and around the dragon in deliberate geometric precision, not decorative, not artistic embellishment, but intentional coded systematic, was a design that several people in that room recognized, and several more almost recognized, and none of them wanted to say out loud, because saying it out loud meant it was real. Colonel David Mercer took one step forward, and then he went rigid. Every muscle in his body snapped to attention with the involuntary precision of a man who has been trained since the beginning of his military career to recognize exactly one symbol as an unconditional command for total deference. He raised his right hand, and he saluted. His voice when it came was not the voice of a colonel commanding a base. It was the voice of a man standing at the edge of something that was much, much bigger than he was. "Commander Emily Carter," he said. "Black Dragon Division." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Ryan's arms unfolded. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His jaw had separated from its customary position of absolute certainty and was now somewhere in the vicinity of his chest. Phones hit the floor. Not all at once, one by one, as comprehension traveled through the room at different speeds, finding each person wherever they were in their understanding, and then dropping their hands. Lucas Reed stood very still with Emily Carter's transfer folder pressed against his chest, his heart beating so hard he could feel it in his fingers. And Private Lucas Reed, 22 years old, 6 months at Fort Blackridge, the only person in the room who had not laughed, looked at the woman standing in the center of the mess hall, with her shirt raised and 300 frozen soldiers around her and a saluting colonel and a man with a collapsing face who had publicly humiliated her for the last 40 minutes. And he thought she already knew. She knew the whole time. She knew what was going to happen when she walked through those doors. She knew what Ryan was going to do, what Jessica was going to do, what the room was going to do. She walked in anyway. Why? And in the far corner, Nathan Hayes sat very still with his face-down phone beside his coffee cup and his classified tablet pushed to the side and his mind running at full speed behind a perfectly neutral expression. Because he had just realized something. Something that changed the shape of everything he thought he knew about why he was at Fort Blackridge. He hadn't found the corruption investigation first. She had, and she had been here before he arrived. Emily lowered her shirt. She turned to face the room. And for the first time since she'd walked through those doors, she looked at everyone. All of them. One slow, complete rotation, taking in every face, the pale ones, the shocked ones, the ones still processing, the ones already afraid. Her expression had not changed. It had never changed, because she had never needed it to. "I'd like my transfer papers back," she said. She looked at Ryan. "Please." The papers were still on the floor. Nobody had picked them up. Ryan hadn't moved. He was standing exactly where he'd been when Colonel Mercer said her name, Commander Emily Carter, Black Dragon Division. And the word commander was still sitting inside his chest like a piece of shrapnel that hadn't finished moving yet. His arms were at his sides. His jaw was tight. His eyes hadn't left her face. Emily lowered her shirt, smoothed it once with both hands. Then she looked at Ryan with an expression that was not anger, not satisfaction, not the particular heat of someone who had just won something. It was something much harder to deal with than any of those things. It was patience. The kind of patience that has been tested so many times it stopped being a choice and became a permanent condition. "I'd like my transfer papers back," she said. "Please." Ryan looked at the torn folder on the floor between them. The two halves. His name was technically on the incident. Now the throwing 300 witnesses with phones. He knew that. He felt it. But he was a man who had spent 4 years surviving this base on the foundation of never backing down publicly, and that foundation was cracking under his feet right now, and he could not figure out which direction to step. Jessica Monroe stepped in first. She crossed the floor, bent down, and picked up both halves of the folder. She straightened them as best she could, pressed them together, and held them out to Emily with both hands. It was a small gesture, quiet, but in that room in that moment, it was loud as a gunshot. Ryan watched her do it and said nothing. Jessica didn't look at him. She looked at Emily. "I apologize for the damage to your documents," she said. Her voice was controlled but not cold. Something in it had changed, stripped back, careful, like a person trying to speak accurately in a language they were still learning. "They can be reprinted through central processing." Emily took the papers. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Jessica nodded once and stepped back. Her face was still composed, but her hands, as she folded them in front of her, pressed together slightly harder than was natural. She felt the eyes of every soldier in the room on the back of her head, and she stood perfectly still under the weight of them. Colonel Mercer moved forward. His salute had come down, but his posture hadn't relaxed. He stopped 2 paces from Emily and spoke in a low voice that still carried clearly in the near-total silence of the room. "Commander, I want to express on behalf of this installation—" "Not yet, Colonel," Emily said. Mercer stopped. "We're not at that part yet," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly and stepped back. Lucas Reed stood at the end of the third table and watched all of it, and felt the specific disorientation of a person watching a situation reveal its actual shape after 30 minutes of being completely wrong about what shape it was. He had known something was off. He had felt it from the moment she walked in, the way she moved, the way she scanned, the trembling in her hands disappeared the moment the pressure actually started. He had felt it and not known what to do with the feeling. Now he knew. He still didn't know what to do with it. Ryan finally moved. He took one slow step back. Not a retreat, he would never call it, that would never think of it that way, but a tactical reposition. His eyes had gone flat in a way that was different from his usual flatness. The usual flatness was confidence. This was calculation. He was running numbers somewhere behind those eyes, and the numbers were not coming out the way he needed them to. "Commander," Bunny said. The word tasted wrong in his mouth and everyone could hear it. "My apologies if the evaluation process was irregular." Emily looked at him. "Was it an evaluation?" she asked. The question sat in the room for a long moment. Because from where I was standing, she said, it looked like something else. Ryan's jaw worked. I was ensuring the integrity of, I know what you were doing, Sergeant. Her voice was still level, still patient. So does everyone in this room. Silence. Then she said, I'm going to need a briefing room, and I'm going to need it in the next 15 minutes. She looked at Mercer. Colonel? Of course, Mercer said immediately. Conference room B is available. Good. She tucked what remained of her folder under her arm. I'll also need whoever runs base security on duty tonight. And Captain Hayes. She paused. From the corner table. The room turned. Nathan Hayes sat very still in the far corner with his coffee and his face-down phone and his closed tablet, and for a single exposed second, the careful neutrality he had built and maintained for 11 days cracked just slightly at the edges. She had known he was there. She had known exactly where he was sitting. She had probably known since she walked through the doors. He stood up slowly the way a person stands when they want their body language to communicate that they are completely unsurprised, and he picked up his tablet and his phone, and he crossed the mess hall toward her. The soldiers parted for him. Not because of rank, his cover didn't carry visible rank markers. They parted because of the direction he was walking and where it was leading, and because the room was doing that thing rooms do when the power has shifted and everyone is instinctively orienting toward the new center of gravity. Nathan stopped a few feet from Emily. He looked at her. She looked at him. Captain Hayes, she said, intelligence, embedded 11 days, logistics cover. Commander, he said carefully. Walk with me, she said. And then without waiting, she turned and moved toward the mess hall doors. Nathan glanced once at the room, at the frozen soldiers, at Ryan's collapsed expression, at Jessica Monroe standing with her hands pressed together, at Lucas Reed, holding himself very still at the end of his table, and then he followed her. The doors opened. The sound of the storm rushed in again. Then the doors swung closed. And 300 soldiers stood in the mess hall of Fort Blackridge and looked at each other and did not speak for what felt like a very long time. It was Danny Kowalski who broke it, the weapons specialist. He said it quietly to no one in particular, in the voice of a man arriving at the end of a calculation he hadn't wanted to do. We just recorded all of that. He looked at the phone still in his hand. Every single one of us recorded it. Nobody answered him. Ryan turned and walked to the back of the mess hall without speaking to anyone. He pushed through the kitchen door and read it swing shut behind him. The sound of it, that flat mechanical thud, was the only thing that moved in the room for several seconds. Jessica Monroe stood where she was. She was looking at the floor where the torn papers had been. Then she looked up at the kitchen door Ryan had disappeared through. Then she looked at Lucas Reed. Lucas was already looking at her. Neither of them said anything, but something passed between them, an acknowledgement uncomfortable and necessary of something they were going to have to figure out how to carry going forward. In conference room B, Emily set her damaged folder on the table and sat down across from Nathan Hayes and Colonel Mercer. The room was small, 6 chairs, a wall screen, a whiteboard that still had tactical diagrams from the previous week's briefing. The storm outside, pushed against the single narrow window above the whiteboard, was steady, indifferent pressure. Nathan sat down and opened his tablet. Mercer remained standing near the door, which he closed and locked. Emily put both hands flat on the table. How long have you known? Nathan asked. About the network, she said. 7 months. Nathan absorbed that. 7 months. He had been tracking it for 4. How much do you have? More than you, she said. It wasn't a boast. It was a data point. I have source confirmation on 3 internal contacts. I have transaction records. I have a partial communication chain. She paused. What I don't have yet is the trigger point, the event that's going to move the network from passive collection to active extraction. Nathan looked at her steadily. And you think it's happening here, on this base? I know it's happening here, she said. The question is when. Mercer cleared his throat. He had been listening with the expression of a man being briefed on a problem inside his own house that he hadn't known existed. Commander, with respect, why wasn't this installation informed through standard? Because one of your officers is part of it, Emily said. The room went very quiet. Mercer's face went through several things in rapid sequence. Denial was first. Then the particular look of a person pushing denial aside because the data doesn't support it. Then something harder and colder that was the beginning of professional response. Who, he said. I don't have a confirmed name yet, Emily said. I have a behavioral profile. communication patterns, 3 specific incidents over the past 8 months that narrowed the field to someone at this base with access to alpha-level operational data. She looked at him steadily. That's officer level, above captain. Mercer sat down. It was the first time he had sat since the mess hall. Nathan said the harassment culture, that's not incidental to your investigation. No, Emily said, it's not. You think they're using it as a screen. I think toxic culture creates information blind spots, she said. When soldiers are focused on social hierarchy and internal dominance structures, their threat awareness goes outward. They stop questioning what's happening inside. They stop noticing irregularities in their own chain of command because they're too busy managing the social dynamics of the unit. She opened her folder, which was damaged but still functional. She slid a single printed page across the table. Fort Blackridge has had 4 unexplained classified data accesses in the last 6 months, all flagged as user error, all closed without escalation. Nathan looked at the page. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened considerably. I saw 2 of these, he said. You saw 2? Oh, Emily confirmed. The other 2 were closed before your embed began. Who closed them? Emily looked at him. Nathan looked back at her. Right, he said quietly. Back in the mess hall, things had not returned to normal. They had returned to a state that resembled normal on the surface trays being cleared. Conversations restarting the ambient noise of a large room full of people. But underneath the surface, the dynamic was completely different from what it had been 90 minutes earlier. The conversations that were happening were not the conversations that usually happen on a Friday night. They were quiet, fragmented, happening in pairs and threes rather than the usual loud group clusters. Lucas Reed was still at his table. He had not moved. He had not eaten anything else. He was sitting with his hands around a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and he was thinking about the look on Emily Carter's face when she said his name. Private Lucas Reed. She had repeated it the way you repeat something you're filing. Not socially, not warmly exactly, with the precision of someone building a mental record. He thought about that. He thought about the fact that in a room of 300 people, she had handed her documents specifically to him, not to the nearest person, not to an officer, to him, the one person who hadn't laughed. Had that been random? He turned the question over, set it down, picked it up again. No, nothing about her had been random since the moment she walked through those doors. Every single thing, the stillness, the patience, the 41-second strip down, the way she let Ryan escalate all the way to the inspection before she stopped it, every single thing had been deliberate, which meant choosing him had been deliberate, which meant that she had clocked him the moment she entered the room, which meant she had assessed 300 people in under 4 seconds and identified him. Why the kitchen door swung open? Ryan walked back out. He had washed his face. Lucas could tell from the slightly damp look around his hairline, and he had taken whatever time he needed in there to rebuild his expression into something that at least approximated control. He walked back to the center table and sat down. Nobody at the table said anything to him. Nobody looked directly at him. He picked up his fork, set it back down, picked it up again. Corporal Mike Tran, who had been at Ryan's table for 2 years and had laughed the loudest at the beginning of the night, said very quietly, "Sarge, you okay?" Ryan said, "I'm fine." Mike looked at the fork in Ryan's hand, then at Ryan's face, then back at his own tray. "Okay," he said. Jessica Monroe appeared beside Lucas's table. He looked up. She stood there for a moment with her arms at her sides and her expression doing the complicated work of a person who has something to say and is not entirely sure they have the right to say it. Then she said, "Can I sit down?" Lucas gestured at the empty bench across from him. She sat, folded her hands on the table, looked at them for a moment, then looked at him. "You held her documents," she said. "Yeah." "You didn't record anything?" "No." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Why not?" Lucas thought about it. "I don't know exactly," he said. "It just felt wrong. The whole thing felt wrong from the beginning. I didn't know what she was. I didn't know what was happening, but it felt wrong to add to it." Jessica nodded slowly. She was looking at the table again. "I've been here 3 years," she said. "I've seen Ryan do this variations of this probably 40 times. To recruits, to junior officers, to anyone who showed up looking like they didn't fit the existing picture." She paused. I've never stopped it. Lucas didn't say anything. I didn't stop it tonight either, she said. Not until it was already obvious what she was, which means I stopped it when it was safe to stop it. She looked at him directly. That's not the same thing as courage. Lucas held her eyes. No, he said. It's not. They sat with that for a moment. Then Jessica said, she knew your name before she left. Yeah. She specifically asked for Hayes by position. She didn't ask for you. Jessica frowned slightly, but she used your name when she gave you the folder. She knew who you were before you introduced yourself. Lucas felt something move through his chest, cold and clear like a bell being struck. I know, he said. How does she know who you are? Lucas looked across the mess hall at the doors Emily had walked through. The storm was still pressing against the building, steady and indifferent. I have no idea, he said, but even as he said it, he was already wondering if that was true. In conference room B, Emily was on her feet. She had been sitting for exactly 12 minutes. Now she was standing at the whiteboard, and she had erased the previous tactical diagrams and replaced them with something considerably more complex, a web of connections, names, dates, and incident codes drawn from memory in precise handwriting that filled the board in 3 minutes without a single correction. Nathan Hayes sat forward in his chair looking at it. His expression had completed its evolution from cautious professional neutrality into something that was close to undisguised attention. This took you 7 months to build, he said. The visible part, she said. The structural analysis took longer. The structural analysis, Mercer repeated. He was looking at the board with the particular expression of a man seeing his installation mapped from the inside by someone who has been living in his blind spots. How long have you been physically present at this base? Emily looked at him. How long have you been physically present here? He said again. And now his voice was different, stripped of the deference operating on pure professional need to know. Before tonight. Emily picked up the marker. She drew a date on the board. 6 weeks ago. The color left Mercer's face. You've been on my base for 6 weeks, he said. In and around, she said. Mostly observing, building the behavioral profile, confirming the pattern. Under what cover? She looked at him steadily. Under what cover, Commander? Does it matter right now, she said. It matters because I have a base to run and I apparently don't have full situational awareness of my own installation, and I would like to begin correcting that immediately. Colonel? Her voice was quiet, firm, not unkind. You will have everything, I promise you that. But right now I need you to focus on the board because what I'm about to tell you is going to change the operational posture of this installation for the next 72 hours. And I need you present in processing, not processing your feelings about my methods. Mercer looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the board. Good, Emily said. Now, the network has been running a passive collection operation for approximately 14 months. Their model is patient low volume, high value sporadic enough to avoid pattern recognition by standard monitoring protocols. But 3 weeks ago, the collection pattern changed. She circled a cluster of dates on the board. Frequency increased. The data being accessed shifted from strategic planning documents to something more specific, something operational. Nathan said active mission data. Yes. Which means they're not collecting for future use anymore, Nathan said. They're servicing a current request. Yes. Which means there's a deadline. Emily looked at him. When, he said. She looked at the board. Based on the communication pattern, I've been tracking the gaps, the response times, the sequential nature of what's been accessed. I believe they're within a week of completing the transfer. Mercer was very still. Transfer of what specifically? Emily put the marker down. She turned to face both of them. The full operational schedule for the next 6 months of Black River exercises, she said, including insertion coordinates, support asset positioning, and the identity of every undercover operative currently embedded in this region. The room was absolutely silent. Nathan said very quietly, if that gets out, people die, Emily said simply. A lot of people who are currently in the field right now trusting that their cover is intact. The storm outside pressed harder against the window. The light above the whiteboard flickered, and in the mess hall, 300 soldiers sat in the uncomfortable truth of a Friday night that had started as theater and turned into something none of them had the framework to fully understand yet. Ryan Cole sat at his table with his fork and his cold food and the specific interior experience of a man whose entire sense of himself is being quietly dismantled from the inside. He had spent 4 years believing that power was the thing that kept you safe, that dominance was the thing that kept you credible, that if you could make people afraid of you, nothing could touch you. He sat with that belief now and felt it change shape in his hands. Because the woman he had grabbed and thrown papers at and publicly degraded for 40 minutes was right now in a locked conference room with a colonel and an intelligence officer running the real operation. And he had not just failed to see it coming, he had helped it along. Every test he threw at her, every escalation, every phone camera he invited to record, he had not been exposing her. He had been demonstrating himself. He set his fork down. And for the first time in 4 years at Fort Blackridge, Sergeant First Class Ryan Cole sat alone at his own table and felt the terrifying, unfamiliar, completely disorienting weight of genuine uncertainty. Not about what she was, about what he was. Lucas Reed watched him from across the room, and in conference room B, Emily Carter stood at the whiteboard with a marker in her hand looking at the web she had built over 7 months, and she was thinking about the private who hadn't laughed. She was thinking about what that meant, and she was thinking about what was coming. Because the rogue network didn't know yet that she was here, but they would, and when they found out, everything was going to move very fast. The briefing ended at 21:47 hours. Emily walked out of conference room B first, and Nathan Hayes followed 2 steps behind her, and Colonel Mercer came last, pulling the door shut with the careful, deliberate movement of a man who had just been handed a weight he hadn't expected and was now deciding how to carry it without dropping it in front of anyone who might be watching. The corridor outside was empty. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, the kind of institutional quiet that only exists in military buildings after 9 o'clock when the administrative layer of the base shuts down, and what remains is the operational skeleton, guards duty officers rotating watch personnel who mostly sit in silence and wait for something to not happen. Emily stopped at the intersection of 2 corridors and stood very still for a moment. Nathan watched her. She was doing it again, that thing she did where her eyes moved and her body didn't, cataloging the space around her with the efficiency of a system running a background process that never fully powered down. "You already have someone inside the network," he said. Not a question. She looked at him. "What makes you say that?" "Because you know the communication pattern," he said. "Not the metadata, the actual rhythm of it, the gaps, the response times. That's not signals intelligence, that's human intelligence. Someone is talking to you from the inside." Emily said nothing for a moment. Then, "The source is protected." "I understand that," Nathan said. "I'm not asking for a name. I'm asking because if you have an inside source and the network detects that source before we move." "They won't," she said. "You can't know that." "I know my source," she said, and the way she said it closed the subject completely. Not harshly, just with the finality of a door that was never going to open. Mercer stepped forward. "Commander, the immediate operational question is containment. If the network becomes aware of your presence on this base—" "They already know," Emily said. Both men went still. "As of approximately 2200 hours tonight," she said, "the footage of this evening's events in the mess hall is already moving through at least 2 unofficial channels that I have been monitoring. By morning, it will reach someone who will run my face through a recognition system. Not the military system." She paused. "A different one." Nathan said, "How long before they identify you?" "They won't identify me," she said. "They'll identify the tattoo." The corridor was very quiet. "Black Dragon designation is known to the network," she continued. "Not the program details, not the personnel, but the symbol. They've encountered it before in a different context. When they see it attached to tonight's incident, they will know that someone at their level has arrived at this base." She looked at Mercer. "Which changes their timeline." "They'll accelerate," Nathan said. "Yes." "By how much?" Emily turned and started walking. "That's what we're going to find out. Come with me." She moved with the quiet, purpose-driven speed of someone who had already mapped every corridor on this base and was now simply executing a route she had planned long days ago. Nathan fell into step beside her. Mercer followed, pulling out his radio and speaking quietly into it. "Security channel 2-man escort. No announcement, no explanation." They passed the administrative wing, turned left at the secondary barracks corridor, and stopped in front of a door that Lucas Reed had walked past probably 200 times without ever having a reason to look at it directly. A supply management office. Windowless. The light under the door was off. Emily pressed a 5-digit code into the keypad, not a standard base code, something else entirely, and the lock disengaged. Inside the room was not what it appeared to be from the corridor. Nathan stepped in and looked at the wall opposite the door and felt something shift behind his sternum, the specific physical reaction of an intelligence professional confronting evidence of a parallel operation he had been completely unaware of. The wall was covered, not messily, meticulously. Printed documents, photographs, printed communication intercepts, a timeline that ran in a horizontal line from a point 6 months ago to a projected point 11 days in the future, color-coded, with a system that Nathan didn't immediately understand but could see was internally consistent. A second whiteboard, smaller than the one in conference room B, more detailed, held a web of connections that was a refined version of what she had drawn earlier. Names he recognized, incident codes he had seen in his own investigation files, and other things he had not seen, things he had not known to look for. "You've been running a full forward operating the base inside my supply management office," Mercer said. His voice was very controlled. "I needed a secure workspace," Emily said, "for 6 weeks. "Yes," Mercer looked at the wall, "and nobody on my staff noticed." "Your supply management officer noticed," Emily said. "He reported it through standard channels on day 3. Mercer turned to look at her. "I never received that report." "No," Emily said, "you didn't." The implication landed in the room like something physical. Mercer's jaw tightened. The report was intercepted. "Rerouted," Emily said. "Same thing in practice. Your supply officer filed it correctly. It went up through the administrative chain, and it was redirected before it reached your desk." She walked to the wall and put her finger on a specific name in the connection web. "By this person." Nathan looked at the name. He recognized it. His stomach dropped 2 inches in his chest. "That's a lieutenant colonel," he said. "Yes," Emily said. He's been on this base for 11 years, Mercer said. "He has a family here. His daughter was born at the base hospital." "I know," Emily said, not without feeling, but with the specific quality of someone who has already processed their feelings about it and put them somewhere they can be retrieved later when there is time. "I know all of that. It doesn't change what he's done." Mercer sat down in the single chair beside the door. He put one hand over his mouth and looked at the wall. Nathan said very quietly, "Does he know you're here?" "Not yet," Emily said. "He knows something is here. The tattoo footage will sharpen that. But he doesn't know it's a specific investigation. He thinks it might be a coincidence, a Black Dragon operator on an unrelated assignment." She pulled a photograph from the wall, slid it to Nathan, "Which is why he's going to make contact with the external network tonight." Nathan looked at the photograph. Time-stamped. Recent. A man leaving the base's East Communications building at 0214 hours on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago. The face was partially obscured, but the uniform was visible. The rank insignia was visible. "How do you know he'll move tonight specifically?" Nathan said. "Because I gave him a reason to." She pointed at the timeline on the wall. The mess hall incident created urgency. A level Omega operator arrives at Fort Blackridge unexpectedly and makes a scene that gets recorded by 300 phones and will be online within hours. If I'm in his position, I'm not waiting to see how this develops. I'm contacting my handlers immediately. "You staged tonight," Nathan said. "Not just the reveal, the whole thing." Emily looked at him. "You let Ryan do all of that," he said. "You could have shut it down at any point. You let it run because you needed the footage to move. You needed the network to see it." "Yes," she said. Nathan absorbed this, turned it over, looked at it from several angles. "The soldiers in that mess hall," he said. "Ryan, Monroe, all of them. They were part of your operation tonight without knowing it." "Everything that happened in that room was real," Emily said. "Their behavior was real. Their reactions were real. I didn't manufacture any of it. I just didn't stop it." She paused. "That distinction matters to me. But the outcome was engineered." "All outcomes are engineered by someone," she said. "The question is, who is doing the engineering and in which direction?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then Nathan said, "What do you need from me?" Emily was already back at the wall, pulling a second set of documents from a folder she had removed from a locked drawer in the supply desk. "I need the East Communications building on soft surveillance starting at 0100. Nothing that will flag on the building's own monitoring systems. Passive only." She handed him a page. These are the 3 frequencies he's used for external contact previously. I need all of them monitored and recorded. Nathan looked at the page. The technical specifications were precise and complete. He would not have been able to put them together faster himself. And you, he said, where will you be? Here, she said, until the contact is confirmed. Then I'll move. Alone, she looked at him. I'm going to pretend I didn't ask that, he said. Good idea, she said. Mercer stood up from his chair. He looked like a man who had aged several years in the last 30 minutes and was in the process of deciding whether to be angry about it or to simply keep moving. He chose a movement. I need to know one more thing, he said. The person inside the network, your source. Are they in danger tonight? Emily looked at the timeline on the wall. They're always in danger, she said. Tonight is no different from any other night. She paused. But tonight I'm closer to them than I've been in 7 months, so if something changes, I'll know faster. Mercer nodded. Then he straightened, pulled his radio back to his mouth, and began giving quiet, precise instructions to his security team in the language of a man who had processed his shock and was now purely operational. Nathan moved to the secondary desk and opened his tablet and began setting up the surveillance parameters. Emily turned back to the wall. And she stood there alone looking at 7 months of work, and she let herself feel for exactly the count of 10 seconds the full weight of what was at stake. The names embedded in that operational schedule. The people in the field right now sleeping in unfamiliar places and trusting a system that had been compromised. The source who had been feeding her information at enormous personal risk for almost a year. 10 seconds. Then she put it away and got back to work. At 23:12 hours, Lucas Reed was still awake. He was in the barracks, sitting on his bunk with his boots still on, staring at the underside of the bunk above him. His bunkmate, a specialist named Torres, was asleep and snoring, with the aggressive consistency of someone who had decided that whatever had happened in the mess hall tonight was not his problem and had chosen unconsciousness accordingly. Lucas envied him. He could not stop thinking about what Jessica had said. She knew your name before you introduced yourself. He turned that over and over and couldn't find a place to put it that made it feel ordinary. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. An unknown number, no area code he recognized. A single text message. It said, "Conference room B 10 minutes. Come alone. Tell no one." Lucas sat up. He looked at Torres still asleep, looked at the door of the barracks, looked at his phone. The rational part of his brain, the part that had gotten him through 6 months at Fort Blackridge without making any serious mistakes, told him that responding to anonymous text messages at 11 o'clock at night was not something a sensible soldier did. The other part of his brain, the part that had watched a woman scan every exit in a room before she said a single word, the part that had held her transfer documents and felt something shift in the air around him, that part was already lacing up his boots. He got up quietly. Conference room B was empty when he arrived. The whiteboard had been erased. The chairs were pushed back under the table. The room looked like it had not been occupied in hours. Lucas stood in the doorway for a moment, checked his phone. The message was still there. He was not imagining it. He stepped inside. The door behind him opened. He turned. Emily Carter walked in and closed the door. She looked at him with that same direct, unhurried attention she had paid him in the mess hall, the look that cataloged rather than connected, that processed rather than performed. She was still in the same clothes. She didn't look tired. He didn't know how that was possible. "Sit down, Private Reed," she said. He sat. She sat across from him, folded her hands on the table and said, "I'm going to tell you something and then I'm going to ask you something. The thing I tell you is classified at a level that requires you to not repeat it to anyone on this base, including your commanding officers, unless I specifically authorize it. Do you understand?" Lucas said yes. "Are you sure? Because I need actual comprehension, not compliance." "I understand," he said. She looked at him for one more second. "Then you have a cousin, Specialist Aaron Reed, currently embedded in a field operation in a location I can't name." Lucas went completely still. "He's been there for 4 months," Emily said. "He's one of 14 operators whose covers are protected by the operational schedule that is currently being sold off this base." The blood drained out of Lucas's face in a way he could feel happening, a specific cold wave moving downward from his scalp. "Is he, sir?" "He's fine," Emily said immediately. "As of 1800 hours today, he is fine. That is current confirmed information." She held his eyes. but he will not remain fine if the transfer completes. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, Lucas said. His voice was different now. Everything was different now. What do you need from me? I need to know about Ryan Cole, she said. Lucas blinked. Of everything he had expected her to say, that was not it. Ryan? I've been building his behavioral profile for 6 weeks, she said. I have his fitness reports, his incident record, his communication logs, his social patterns within the unit. But those are institutional records. They're accurate, but they're flat. She leaned forward slightly. You've watched him for 6 months from the bottom of the chain. You've been in the room when he didn't think it mattered who was watching. Tell me who he actually is. Lucas thought about it. Thought about it honestly, the way you have to think about someone you've spent 6 months being afraid of and never quite admitting it to yourself. He's not stupid, he said finally. That's the thing that people get wrong about him in. He's very smart. He reads people fast, and he uses what he reads. He paused. But everything he knows he uses for the same purpose. Control. He doesn't have any goals except to be the most powerful person in whatever room he's in. Has he ever violated operational security in your presence? Any instance of accessing or discussing information he shouldn't have had? Lucas thought. No, he said slowly. Not that I've seen. He's aggressive about status, but he's not reckless. He paused. Actually, he's one of the most security-conscious people on base. He's reported other soldiers for protocol violations. Multiple times. Emily absorbed this. So he uses the security culture as a dominance tool. Yeah, Lucas said. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Emily was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, a recalibration, small and fast. One more question, she said. Lieutenant Monroe, what changed tonight? Not the surface change, the real one. Lucas thought about Jessica sitting across from him at the mess hall table, hands pressed together saying, I stopped it when it was safe to stop it. She's been performing the version of herself that survives here, he said. Competing on Ryan's terms because those were the only terms she thought were available. He looked at Emily. Tonight she saw different terms. Emily nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? Lucas said. She waited. Aaron, he said, my cousin. Is that why you chose me in the mess hall when you gave me the documents? Did you already know about him? Emily looked at him steadily. I chose you because you were the only person in that room who didn't take a phone out, she said. That told me everything I needed to know about your instincts. She paused. Aaron Reed being your cousin is something I learned afterward, when I ran your full record tonight after the briefing. So it's a coincidence, he said. I don't believe in coincidences, she said. But yes, in the mechanical sense, it was not why I chose you. Lucas exhaled. Okay. But it does change what I'm going to ask of you next, she said. He looked at her. I need someone inside the barracks tonight who is watching Ryan Cole, she said. Not engaging, not confronting, watching. If he leaves between 0100 and 0400, I need to know immediately which door, which direction, how he was dressed. She slid a small device across the table. It looked like a standard wireless earbud. This connects directly to my frequency. Single button on the back. Press once to transmit. Lucas picked it up. You're not obligated, she said. I want to be clear about that. You're a private. This is not your operation, and I am not your commanding officer in any formal capacity. You're asking anyway, he said. I'm asking anyway, she agreed. Lucas closed his hand around the earbud. Aaron has a daughter, he said. She's 8 months old. He hasn't met her yet. He looked up. I'm in. Emily looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but adjusted, like a door opening a quarter inch. Get back to the barracks, she said. Act normal. Sleep if you can. Set an alarm for 0030 if you need it. He stood up, moved to the door, then stopped. Commander, he said. She looked at him. For what it's worth, he said. What Ryan did tonight, the whole unit saw it. Not just the phones, they saw it and they'll carry it. That's not going to Bossard to win. Emily looked at him steadily. I know, she said. That's also part of what tonight was for. He left. She sat alone in the empty conference room for a moment, looking at the erased whiteboard. Then her earpiece clicked. Nathan's voice. Quiet. Controlled. We have movement. She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. East Communications Building, she said. Negative, Nathan said, and his voice had a quality to it that Emily had not heard from him before. Something careful, something that was making sure to stay controlled precisely because what it was controlling wanted very much not to be. It's not the East Building. Emily stopped walking. Then where, she said. A pause. 1 second. 2. It's coming from the base commander's office, Nathan said. Emily stood in the empty corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. The storm pressed against the building. And in the barracks, Lucas Reed lay on his bunk in the dark with an earbud in his left ear and his hand flat on his chest, feeling his heart beat steadily against his palm, thinking about a baby girl 8 months old in a house somewhere waiting for a father who didn't know yet how close everything had just come to going wrong. And in the East Communications building, a man whose name Emily had been building toward for 7 months was making contact with people who were about to learn that the window they thought they had was already closed. They just didn't know it yet. But the base commander's office. Emily stood in the corridor and ran it back, the access logs, the communication reroutes, the redirected report from the supply officer. She had attributed all of it to the lieutenant colonel whose name was circled on her wall. But the lieutenant colonel's office was in the West Administrative Wing, not the base commander's. She pulled out her phone, opened the secure app, ran a 30-second recalculation against the pattern she had built over 7 months. And the pattern rearranged itself around a different center. She had been right about the network. She had been wrong about who was running it. She started moving, fast. Her footsteps on the linoleum were silent. Her breathing was steady. Her face was completely composed. And she was thinking with the particular clarity that comes to people who have survived long enough to know that the most dangerous moment in any operation is the moment you discover you were looking in the wrong direction. She was thinking, how long has he known I was here? She was already running. Not sprinting, controlled, fast, silent, the kind of movement that doesn't announce itself. Her footsteps on the linoleum found the quietest part of each stride automatically, the way breathing finds its own rhythm, in people who have trained long enough that their body makes the right choices before their mind catches up. Nathan's voice came through her earpiece again. Emily, talk to me. Who else has access to the base commander's office at this hour, she said. Not a question, a calculation spoken aloud. On a normal night, nobody. The colonel goes home at 2100. Night duty officer has a key for emergencies, but there's a log entry requirement. A pause. There's no log entry tonight. Because whoever is in there didn't use the duty officer's key, she said. They have their own. Yes. She turned the corner into the administrative wing corridor and stopped at the intersection. The base commander's office was 40 feet ahead on the right. The light under the door was thin, not the overhead fluorescent something smaller. A desk lamp, deliberately limited, the kind of light you use when you don't want anyone walking past outside to notice you're there. Nathan, she said quietly, I need you to pull the base commander's complete communication record for the last 14 months. Everything, internal and external. Cross-reference it against the 3-way incident codes I gave you earlier tonight. A silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. Emily, but then he said, Mercer has been on this base for 9 years. I know. He has a commendation from the Joint Chiefs. I know. His wife teaches at the base school. Nathan, her voice was very quiet. Pull the record. Another silence. Then the sound of keys. Pulling now, he said. His voice had gone flat in the way that people's voices go flat when they are doing something that feels wrong and doing it anyway because the operational requirement is larger than the feeling. Emily moved to the wall beside the office door. She put her back against it and listened. Inside, a voice. Low, male. She could not make out words through the door, but she could hear the cadence, the measured, deliberate rhythm of someone reading from a document or reciting something prepared. Not a spontaneous conversation. A transmission. Pre-structured. The kind of thing you write out in advance and read verbatim because the precision of the language matters and you cannot afford to improvise. She had heard that cadence before. In recording intercepts. 7 months of them. She knew that voice. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them and turned the handle and walked in. Colonel David Mercer was standing behind his desk with a satellite phone pressed to his ear and a printed document in his other hand. He was in civilian clothes, dark shirt, no rank, no insignia, which told her he had not planned to be seen by anyone tonight. He saw her the moment the door opened. He did not run. He did not drop the phone. He did not lunge for anything in the desk drawer. He simply stood there, and his face went through the most honest sequence of expressions Emily had seen from him all evening, because there was nothing left to manage now, no performance left to maintain, and what remained was just the raw truth of a man being caught at the exact moment of the thing he had spent 14 months doing. First shock, then the particular specific shame of someone who has been found out not by an enemy, but by someone they respect. Then something that was almost relief. He lowered the phone. He did not end the call. He just lowered it to his side and looked at her. "Commander Carter," he said. "Put the phone down, Colonel," she said. He set it on the desk. The call was still open. She could hear the faint ambient sound of an open line, someone on the other end listening, waiting, trying to understand from the silence what had just happened. Emily picked up the phone. She held it to her ear. She said in a voice that was completely level, "This operation is over. Every asset connected to this network is being rolled up as of this moment. You have approximately 4 hours before federal warrants reach your location. What you do with those 4 hours is your decision." She ended the call. She set the phone back on the desk. Mercer was watching her. His hands were at his sides. He looked like a man standing at the bottom of something, a hole he had dug over a very long time. One careful shovelful at a time, each one seeming small and manageable, until the moment he looked up and couldn't see the top anymore. "How long?" she said. 14 months, he said. His voice was steady. He had clearly decided in the 3 seconds between her walking in and now that the only thing he had left was honesty. 14 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. What was the leverage? He looked at the window. The storm was still pressing against it. "My son," he said. "He was involved in something 3 years ago, before he was discharged. Something that if it had been prosecuted properly, he would have gone to prison." A pause. They had the documentation, the original files that somehow never made it into the official record. He looked back at her. They said they would resurface them. "So you protected your son by selling out 14 operators in the field," Emily said. The words were not cruel, they were precise. But precision in that moment was its own kind of cruelty, and both of them knew it. Mercer's jaw tightened. "I made a terrible choice, and I have spent every day since making a slightly worse version of it because I couldn't find a way out that didn't destroy everything." His voice cracked once on the word everything and then rebuilt itself. I had a plan. I was going to find a way to get those files back, and then I was going to report the whole thing and take whatever came with it." "When were you planning to do that?" Emily said. He didn't answer. "Colonel, I don't know," he said quietly. "I kept pushing the date." The room was very quiet. Emily stood across the desk from a 9-year base commander with a Joint Chiefs commendation and a wife who taught at the base school and a son he had destroyed his career to protect, and she let the silence exist for exactly as long as it needed to before she spoke again. "The files on your son," she said. "I have them. I've had them for 3 months." Mercer looked at her. "The network held them as leverage," she said, "which meant they were part of the operational infrastructure I've been dismantling. I pulled them in February." She looked at him steadily. "They no longer exist in any system connected to this network." Mercer sat down, slowly, like a man whose legs have decided to make a decision his brain hasn't caught up to yet. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "that the thing they were holding over me has been gone for 3 months, she said. "Yes." The sound he made was not quite a word. It was the specific exhale of a person whose body is trying to process the simultaneous reality of enormous relief and enormous devastation. The thing that was crushing you is gone. And also, you kept doing the thing it made you do for 3 months after it stopped having any power over you. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," she said. "That's why I'm telling you now instead of letting the arrest team walk you out of here in handcuffs." His head came up. "You still have a choice, Colonel," she said. "A narrow one, but it exists." She put both hands flat on his desk. "There are people on the other end of that phone call who are going to run in the next 4 hours. I need to know every contact point you have for this network. Every name, every frequency, every location you have passed information to or received instructions from. All of it. Right now. Tonight." Mercer looked at her hands on his desk. Then he looked at her face. And if I give you all of it, he said, then I will go on record that you cooperated fully and immediately upon discovery, she said, which does not erase what happened, but it means something. To the people in the field whose lives you helped put at risk, it means something that you chose to help end it. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened the desk drawer. Emily's hand moved instinctively, not to a weapon, just to readiness, that automatic physical shift of someone whose body prepares for contingency before the mind finishes its assessment. But Mercer pulled out a notebook, a physical notebook, handwritten, small, dense handwriting organized by date. He set it on the desk and pushed it toward her. 14 months, he said, every contact, every location, every transmission detail. He pulled his hand back. I kept records. I told myself it was so I could report it when I was ready, but I think he stopped, looked at the notebook. I think I kept it because I needed to believe that what I was doing had a boundary, that I was tracking it because someday it would have to end. Emily picked up the notebook. She did not open it yet. She looked at him. It's ending tonight, she said. She pressed her earpiece. Nathan, I'm in the base commander's office. I need you here in the next 3 minutes with your full recording setup. Mercer is cooperating. We're going to be here for a while. A pause. Then Nathan's voice stripped of everything except operational acknowledgement. On my way. Then she pressed the earpiece again. Different frequency. One click. In the barracks, Lucas Reed felt the single buzz of the incoming signal in his left ear. He was lying on his bunk with his eyes open, watching the dark above him, completely awake. He pressed the button once to confirm receipt. There was no voice, no instruction, just a single contact. I'm here. I'm operational. Stay alert. He exhaled slowly. Torres was still snoring. Across the barracks in the senior NCO section, Ryan Cole was also awake. He had been awake since he left the mess hall, lying on his back, with one arm over his eyes, running through the evening, over and over in a loop that kept arriving at the same place from every possible angle. He kept seeing the moment she lowered her shirt, not the tattoo the moment before it, the moment when she looked at him and said, "Okay, Sergeant," in that voice that was the complete absence of fear, and he had understood in some part of himself that he was about to see something that he was not prepared for and could not stop. He had been right about that. He had been catastrophically wrong about everything that led up to it. Ryan was not a man who spent a lot of time in self-examination. His operational model had always been forward. Identify the obstacle, remove the obstacle, move. Feelings were something that happened to other people or to the version of yourself you dealt with in privacy and never acknowledged to anyone. But tonight the obstacle had turned out to be himself, and he couldn't move around that. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. A message from an unknown number, different from the one Lucas had received, differently formatted, but the same origin point in a way he wouldn't have known to identify. It said, "Sergeant Cole, duty post, East Corridor, now." Ryan stared at it. Then he got up, got dressed, and went. The East Corridor was empty when he arrived. He stood in it for a moment, feeling the particular exposure of a large man standing alone in a fluorescent-lit corridor at midnight following an anonymous text message, and acknowledging to himself that this was a thing he was doing and that it was by any rational metric, not standard operating procedure. "Sergeant Cole," he turned. Jessica Monroe was walking toward him from the direction of the administrative wing. She was in uniform. She looked like she had not slept either. "Monroe," he said, "what is this?" "I don't know exactly," she said. "I got a message saying East Corridor." They looked at each other in the fluorescent light. Two people who had spent years operating in the same space, in the same structure, both suddenly outside the structure, standing in a corridor at midnight, after the most destabilizing evening either of them had experienced in their military careers. Ryan said, "What do you think is happening?" Jessica said, "I think we're being given a chance to be useful." She paused. "I think whether we take it or not is going to say something about us." Before Ryan could respond, footsteps. Emily Carter came around the corner, moving fast. Nathan Hayes a half step behind her, and Colonel Mercer, hands unbound, not arrested but carrying himself with the posture of a man under the weight of his own choices, a step behind Nathan. Emily stopped when she saw Ryan and Jessica. She looked at them both, a quick assessment. "Good, Ma," she said. "You came." "You messaged us," Ryan said. "Yes." "Why?" Because what happens in the next 3 hours is going to require more than 2 intelligence officers and 1 cooperative colonel, she said. And because the people I bring into this room matter, she looked at Ryan directly. And because you know this base better than almost anyone on it, and right now that's more useful than anything else you've done today. Ryan stood very still. The reference to what he'd done today landed exactly where she intended it to, not as a wound, not as a weapon, but as a fact. Placed clearly, acknowledged, not dwelt upon. It was the most precise thing anyone had said to him in 4 years. "What do you need?" he said. "The network has external assets positioned around this installation," Emily said. "Not inside yet, but the communication I interrupted tonight was the activation signal. They received approximately 40 seconds of it before I cut the line. 40 seconds is enough to begin movement." She looked between Ryan and Jessica. "I need to know every soft perimeter point on this base. Every place where the external fence line has had a maintenance issue, a sensor gap, a patrol timing problem. Anything that an outside team would have identified in advance reconnaissance." Ryan and Jessica looked at each other. "South Maintenance Road," Ryan said immediately. "Sensor on Gate 4 has been cycling out for 3 weeks. Maintenance ticket is open, but the part is back-ordered." "North Vehicle Depot," Jessica said. 2 patrol cycles between 0100 and 0300 with an 11-minute gap on the northeast corner. It's in the patrol log, but nobody's adjusted the schedule. "East Utility Corridor," Ryan said. "Runs under the perimeter. Access hatch on the exterior side has a broken lock. Been reported twice. Still not fixed." Emily was already on her radio. She had the base security frequency open, and she was relaying each point as they named it, her voice crisp and fast coordinates and descriptors precise. The kind of verbal transmission that doesn't require notes because the person speaking it already has the base's layout mapped completely in their working memory. Nathan was moving beside her, cross-referencing on his tablet, pulling the surveillance parameters he had set up earlier and redirecting them toward the 3 newly identified entry points. Jessica said, "What's inside the base that they're after?" "You set operational schedules." "The physical backup drive," Emily said. Colonel Mercer was the designated custodian of the Black River Operational Archive. The primary files are digitally transmitted and encrypted beyond their reach. But the physical backup protocol required hard copy is stored in the base commander's secured cabinet. She looked at Mercer. Mercer said, "I moved it this morning when I saw the footage beginning to circulate." His voice was flat, carrying itself with effort. "I moved it to secondary storage. East Building server room code locking cabinet." "You moved classified materials without authorization," Nathan said. "I was going to move it back," Mercer said. He stopped. "It doesn't matter. The point is it's not where they expect it to be," Emily said. "Which means their team will go to the base commander's office, first find it missing, and then they'll have to search, which buys us time." She looked at Ryan. "I need the East Building locked down. Not obviously. No lights, no visible security presence. I want them to believe it's accessible." Ryan said, "You want to let them in?" "I want them inside a building rather than on an open base," she said. "Controlled space. 3 entry points, all of which I'll have covered." "How many on their team?" Ryan said. "Best estimate 4 to 6, she said. "Trained, armed, not soldiers contractors." Which means they're efficient, but they're operating on a paid contract, not on conviction. The moment the operation goes sideways, their first instinct will be extraction, not escalation. Ryan processed this. "And if their first instinct is wrong?" "That's why I need you," she said simply. Ryan looked at her. In the fluorescent light of the East Corridor at 12:40 in the morning, Sergeant First Class Ryan Cole looked at the woman he had grabbed and humiliated and tried to break in front of 300 people, and he felt something move through him that was not comfortable and was not simple and was probably going to take a long time to fully understand. But the surface of it, the part he could access right now, was clear. She was giving him a chance to be something other than what he'd been tonight. "Tell me where you need me," he said. Emily looked at him for exactly 1 second. Something moved in her expression, not warmth, not forgiveness, not absolution, but acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of a person who has seen someone make a choice in a hard direction and is noting it accurately. "East Building," she said, "secondary entrance. You will wait on my signal and you will not move until you hear it. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "Can you actually do that?" she said. "Because what I'm describing requires patience and restraint in a high-pressure situation and based on my observation of your behavioral patterns tonight. Commander, he said. His voice was steady. I can do it. She held his eyes for one more second. Then good. Monroe, you're with me. Hayes East building primary entrance with Cole as secondary. I'll take the server room approach from the utility corridor. She was already moving. We have approximately 40 minutes before they reach the perimeter. They moved. In the barracks, Lucas Reed felt his earpiece activate again. This time there was a voice. Emily's, low and precise. Reed, I need you into the East Building server room. Code on the outer door is 44772. Do not turn on any lights. Find the locked cabinet in the northeast corner and stay next to it. Don't touch it. Don't open it. Just be there when I arrive. Lucas was on his feet before she finished. He had his boots on in 20 seconds. He was out the barracks door in 30. The storm hit him when he stepped outside, rain and wind, both the full weight of it. The storm that had been building all evening, finally delivering on everything it had promised. He ran through it. He was 22 years old and his cousin had a daughter 8 months old. He hadn't met yet, and somewhere outside the perimeter of this base there were people moving in the dark towards something they thought was unguarded, and he had been asked to stand between them and it. He ran. At 0117, the South Maintenance Gate sensor went offline. Nathan saw it on his tablet from his position inside the East Building primary entrance. He pressed his earpiece. Southgate? Sensor down? Emily's voice came back immediately. Confirm, that's them. Start the clock. In the perimeter darkness, 4 shapes moved through the gap in Gate 4 with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this kind of thing before. They moved low and fast, and they knew exactly which direction they were going. They had the base layout, they had the building positions, they had what they believed was a clear operational picture. They did not know about the notebook. They did not know Mercer had cooperated. They did not know that the woman in the mess hall had been 7 months ahead of them from the beginning. They moved toward the base commander's office. Inside, they found nothing. The satellite phone was gone. The document Mercer had been reading from was gone. The desk had been cleared to its standard daytime appearance. Nothing to indicate anything had happened there at all. 30 seconds of searching. Then the team leader's voice, quiet and controlled, speaking into his own earpiece. It's not here, moving to secondary. They knew about the East Building. That was the moment Emily understood how deep the penetration had been. The East Building server room was not common knowledge. It was not on any publicly accessible base layout. The fact that they knew to go there meant their information source had been very close to Mercer, very close and very current. She pressed her earpiece. They're coming to us. Everyone hold. Ryan Cole was standing in the dark of the East Building secondary entrance with his back against the wall and his breathing controlled and his hands steady at his sides, and he was doing the thing Emily had asked him to do, waiting. Holding, not moving, and it was the hardest thing he had done in 4 years, and he was doing it. The team entered through the primary entrance. Nathan tracked their movement from his position and relayed it in real time to Emily. 4 people, armed, moving in file formation toward the server room corridor. Lucas Reed was in the server room. He was standing next to the locked cabinet in the northeast corner in complete darkness, and he could hear footsteps in the corridor, and his heart was hitting the inside of his chest with the specific force of a person experiencing their first real operational moment. And he was doing the thing that separated people who could do this from people who couldn't. He was staying still. The corridor door opened. 2 of the 4 team members entered. Emily came through the utility access hatch in the floor of the server room at the exact same moment, rising from the floor, like something the building had generated, and her voice was the first thing in the room that wasn't silence. Federal operation. Hands where I can see them. Now. The lights came on, all of them, the full overhead grid activated remotely by Nathan from the primary entrance, flooding the room with the sudden hard clarity of complete illumination. Ryan came through the secondary entrance simultaneously, and Jessica Monroe came through the corridor door behind the 2 contractors who were now standing in a server room between a wall and a woman who had come up through the floor and a private who had not moved from the corner and was staring at them with the particular expression of a 22-year-old who has discovered what he is made of and is slightly surprised by the answer. Outside, Nathan and 2 base security officers took the other 2 contractors at the building entrance. Clean and fast, no resistance. the operational picture collapsing for them the moment they understood how comprehensively they had been anticipated. It was over in 90 seconds. Emily stood in the server room in the sudden ringing quiet that follows a thing that has been building for a very long time and has finally resolved, and she breathed once and she looked at Lucas Reed standing next to the cabinet in the corner. He was shaking slightly, his hands, the same small tremor she had shown in the mess hall when she walked in, the body's honest acknowledgement that something real just happened, that the danger was real, that the stakes were real. She looked at it and thought, good. That means he understood what it was. You okay, she said. Yes, he said. And then, yeah, I am. She looked at him for a moment. Your cousin is going to be fine, she said. Lucas exhaled. It came out ragged and long and completely uncontrolled, the exhale of a person releasing something they had been holding since 11 o'clock at night when a text message arrived from an unknown number and changed the shape of the world. Thank you, he said. Emily nodded once. Then she turned to the room to Ryan Cole standing at the secondary entrance, to Jessica Monroe by the corridor door, to the two contractors now secured on the floor, and she looked at all of it with the same composed, patient cataloging attention she had brought into the mess hall 6 hours ago. One thing was finished, but the notebook in her jacket had 14 months of contacts in it, and the 4 hours she had given the other end of that phone call were not up yet. She pressed her earpiece. Nathan, start the federal notification chain. We have 4 in custody and a full cooperation record from the primary source. She paused. And I need a secure line to Black Dragon Command. Tell them we're moving to the extraction phase. Another pause. Tell them the base is intact. She walked out of the server room into the corridor, and her footsteps were quiet and even and unhurried, and behind her the lights of the east building were fully on for the first time all night, pushing back the dark in every direction. The federal notification chain took 11 minutes to activate. By 02:45, Fort Blackridge had 3 unmarked vehicles on the base perimeter, 2 federal agents in the east building processing the 4 contractors in custody, and a secure line open between Emily Carter and Black Dragon Command that was being routed through 4 separate encrypted relays before it reached the other end. The voice on the other end of that line said 2 words when Emily reported the operation complete. Well done. That was all. No elaboration, no ceremony. The way people speak when they operate in spaces where emotion is acknowledged privately and results are acknowledged professionally, and the 2 things are kept carefully separate because mixing them creates a kind of sentiment that gets people killed. Emily said, I need the extraction team for the field assets initiated within the hour. The network's external communication is down, but their internal protocols will generate an automatic alert if there's no contact confirmation by 0400. When that alert fires, anyone connected to the network who is still in the field becomes a target. Extraction is already moving, the voice said. We had the team staged when your operation went active. Emily paused. How long have you had teams staged? Since you entered the mess hall tonight, the voice said. We've been watching your operation in real time since 1700 hours. Emily absorbed this. The specific texture of it, the knowledge that the command structure she operated under had been observing everything, the mess hall, the briefing room, the corridor, the server room, all of it, from a distance that was close enough to activate staged teams and far enough to let her run it without interference. You let me think I was operating with more autonomy than I had, she said. You were operating with complete autonomy, the voice said. We just had eyes on. We don't move unless you go down. A pause. You didn't go down. No, she said, I didn't. She ended the call. She stood alone in the east corridor for a moment with the phone at her side and the storm still pressing at the building from outside lighter. Now the worst of it passing the way storms do when they've delivered everything they built up and there's nothing left to spend. Nathan Hayes found her there 60 seconds later. He came from the direction of the server room, moving with the measured pace of a man who has been operating at high intensity for several hours and is now running on the professional reserve that kicks in when the adrenaline depletes but the work isn't finished. He stopped beside her and looked at the wall opposite and said nothing for a moment. Then, the contractors are talking. Already, she said. The operational picture is worse than we thought, he said. This network has 3 other active nodes. Different bases, different regions. Fort Blackridge was the highest value target, but it wasn't the only one. He looked at her. The information you got from Mercer's notebook is going to be operational for months. Emily said, are the other nodes aware that this one is compromised? Not yet. The communication blackout held. But when 0400 comes and goes without confirmation, they'll know, she said, which is why federal teams need to be at all 3 locations before that. She was already pulling out her phone again. I need to make 3 calls. Already made, Nathan said. She looked at him. I started the contact chain when you were on your secure line. The Federal Coordination Office has all 3 locations from Mercer's notebook. Teams are moving. He paused. I took the initiative. Emily looked at him for a moment, the specific look of a person evaluating whether initiative taken in their operational space was the right kind or the wrong kind. Then good, she said. Nathan exhaled once, very controlled, the exhale of a man who had been slightly less certain than he appeared that the answer was going to be good. One more thing, he said, his voice changed quality, became slightly more careful. The footage from the mess hall, it's been online for 4 hours. It has, he stopped, chose the word accurately. It has traveled. Emily said nothing. Millions of views, he said, multiple platforms, the tattoo, the salute, the moment Mercer said your designation. All of it. He looked at her. Your cover is gone. Not damaged, gone. Whoever you were before tonight is not who you're going to be able to be going forward. Emily was quiet for a long moment. The storm pressed at the wall. Lighter now, but still there. My cover was designed to be expendable, she said finally. The operation required visibility. Visibility requires exposure. She looked at him. I knew what tonight was going to cost when I walked through those doors. And you walked through anyway, he said. The people in the field didn't have a choice about the risk they were carrying, she said. I had a choice about mine. She put her phone in her pocket. That's the difference. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away, pressed his lips together once, looked back. For what it's worth, he said, I've been doing this for 12 years. What you ran tonight, the patience of it, the architecture of it, the way you let every single piece play out exactly as it needed to. He stopped. I've never seen anything like it. Emily said, you've never worked with Black Dragon before. No, he said. Then you haven't seen the best of it, she said. Tonight was functional, messy in places. Mercer was a miscalculation I had to correct in real time. She paused. The best operations are the ones nobody ever knows happened. Is that what you prefer? He said. The invisible ones. She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. I prefer the ones where nobody has to find out what I am. She said it without self-pity as a simple operational fact. Tonight was necessary. That doesn't mean it was clean. Nathan nodded slowly. What happens to Mercer? That's not my decision, she said. I'll provide my full account to the Federal Review Board. I'll state that he cooperated immediately and completely upon discovery. What they do with that is their process. And his son. The files are gone, she said. I said that to Mercer and I meant it. Whatever his son did 3 years ago, he's carrying it on his own conscience now. The network no longer has it. That's the only part that was mine to affect. She started walking, back toward the administrative wing, toward the supply management office that had been her operational base for 6 weeks. She had materials to secure, documentation to package for federal handoff, and a room to leave as clean as she had found it. Nathan walked with her for a moment, then stopped. I'll handle the contractor processing, he said. You've been running for, he checked his watch, 19 hours. I'm fine, she said. I know you're fine, he said. I'm saying I'll handle it, because I can. A pause. Because the mission is done and now there's post-operational procedure and you're allowed to let someone else do the procedure. Emily looked at him. Go tell the private his cousin is on his way home, Nathan said. You told him operationally. Tell him like a human being. Emily stood in the corridor for a moment. Then thank you, Captain Hayes. Nathan, he said. She looked at him. We ran an operation together tonight, he said. You can call me Nathan. Something moved in her expression. Very small. The quarter-inch door again. Thank you, Nathan, she said. She walked. Lucas Reed was sitting outside the east building on a concrete step in the rain when Emily found him. The storm had thinned to a steady drizzle, and he was sitting in it without seeming to notice, elbows on his knees, hands hanging, looking at a specific point on the ground in front of him. That probably wasn't what he was actually seeing. Emily sat down beside him. He looked up. "It's done," she said. He nodded. He had already known that technically from the silence and the changed atmosphere of the building behind him. But knowing technically and hearing it from her were apparently different things, because something in his face changed when she said it. "Aaron," he said. "Extraction team confirmed contact with his unit at 0253, she said. "He's being moved to a secure location as a precaution. Standard protocol when a cover is potentially compromised. He'll be out of the field and in a debriefing facility within 6 hours." She paused. "After the debriefing, he gets 30 days leave." Lucas put both hands over his face. Not crying. Not exactly. The specific physical response of a person whose body is releasing a pressure it has been holding since before they knew they were holding it. The retroactive understanding of how afraid you were. Once you know the thing you were afraid of didn't happen. Emily sat beside him in the drizzle and let it happen. She did not say anything reassuring. She did not say it's okay or you did great or any of the things that people say in these moments to make the silence more comfortable for themselves. She just sat there, and the drizzle came down on both of them, and Lucas Reed pressed his hands against his face and breathed. After a moment, he lowered his hands and looked at the wet ground. "She's 8 months old," he said, "his daughter." He missed the whole first part. "I know," Emily said. "He's going to go home, and she's going to look at him and not know who he is," Lucas said. "And he's going to have to learn her all over again from the beginning. How she likes to sleep, what sounds she makes." He paused. "All the stuff that happened while he was gone." Emily was quiet for a moment. "That's the cost," she said. "It's real. I'm not going to tell you it isn't." She looked at the drizzle. "But he chose the work knowing the cost, and tonight the cost didn't get any higher than it already was. That matters." Lucas looked at her. "Does it get easier knowing the command?" She thought about it honestly. "You get more accurate at measuring it," she said. "Whether that's easier depends on the person." Lucas nodded, accepted that. It was the kind of answer that didn't comfort you in the moment, but that you understood later was the truest thing anyone could have said. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Lucas said, "What happens to Ryan?" Emily said. "What do you think should happen to him?" He looked at her. The question surprised him not because it was strange, but because she said it the way someone says it when they actually want the answer, not when they're making a rhetorical gesture. "I think he needs to be taken apart," Lucas said slowly. "Not destroyed, just taken down to the base and rebuilt." He paused. "He's not a bad person. He's a person who found a system that rewarded the worst version of himself and never had a reason to be anything else." Another pause. "Tonight was a reason." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to be very good at this," she said. Lucas blinked. "At what?" "At the work," she said. "The real work, not the drills, not the rank, the part that matters." She looked at him steadily. "You read people accurately. You act from instinct rather than hierarchy. You stayed still when it counted and you moved when it counted and you knew the difference." She paused. "That's rare." Lucas looked at his hands, wet from the rain, still faintly unsteady. "I was terrified in that server room," he said. "I know," she said. "You were terrified and you stayed still. That's not the absence of fear. That's the right relationship with it." He looked up. "Is that what Black Dragon teaches?" Emily looked at the sky. The clouds were starting to move, the storm finally breaking apart in the upper atmosphere, stars appearing in the gaps like something the night had been holding in reserve. "Black Dragon doesn't teach you to be fearless," she said. "It teaches you to be honest about what you're afraid of. Because the fear you acknowledge is the fear you can work with. The fear you hide is the fear that gets people killed." Lucas sat with that. Then he said quietly, "I saw your hands shake when you walked in tonight." Emily said nothing. "In the mess hall," he said, "just for a second, before anything started, your hands shook." She was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," she said. "What were you afraid of?" he said, not prying, genuinely asking, the way you ask someone a real question when you've been through something real with them. Emily looked at the ground between her feet. "That I was wrong about Mercer," she said. "That the source I had built the whole 7 months on was going to turn out to be wrong at the last moment. That I would walk into that mess hall and run the operation and expose myself, and all of it would land on the wrong person. She paused. That the 14 people in the field would pay for my miscalculation. But you weren't wrong, Lucas said. I was partially wrong, she said. I had the right base, the wrong officer, and I corrected it. But for about 40 minutes in that mess hall while Ryan was running his tests, I was also running a completely different kind of test on myself, on whether my read of the situation was accurate. She looked at him. The trembling was that. Lucas nodded slowly. I thought it was fear of Ryan. Ryan, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite a smile, but was in the vicinity of one, was the least frightening thing in that room. Lucas almost laughed. The first time all night. It came out short and quiet, barely a sound, but it was real. They got up. Inside the East Building was controlled chaos of the federal kind, agents, documentation, contractors being processed. Nathan directing everything with the calm efficiency of a man who had found his operational footing tonight and was standing on it solidly. Emily moved through it toward the supply management office, and as she passed the main corridor intersection, Ryan Cole stepped out of the secondary entrance doorway. He had stayed. She hadn't told him to stay. She hadn't told him to go either. He had stayed. He looked at her. She stopped. They stood in the corridor and looked at each other for a moment without either of them speaking, and the silence between them held everything that had happened since she walked through the mess hall doors. The torn papers on the floor, the phones, the laughter, the 41 seconds with the pistol, the tattoo, the salute, the notebook, the server room. All of it present in the space between them without needing to be named. Ryan said, I owe you an apology. Yes, she said, you do. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. I'm going to give you one that actually means something, instead of one that's about making myself feel better, he said. And I'm not ready to do that yet, because I don't fully understand yet what tonight showed me about myself, and if I apologize before I understand it, the apology is worthless. He paused. Is that acceptable? Emily looked at him. Yes, she said, that's acceptable. When I understand it, he said, I'll find you. I may be difficult to find, she said. I'll manage, he said. Something moved in her expression again. That door, a little further open than before. I believe you, she said. She walked on. Jessica Monroe was in the supply management office when Emily arrived. She was standing in front of the operational wall, the photographs, the timeline, the connection web, looking at it with the concentrated attention of someone reading a language they have partially learned and are trying to fill in the gaps. She turned when Emily came in. You've been here 6 weeks, Jessica said. Yes. I've been on this base for 3 years, Jessica said. I walk past this door every day. She looked at the wall. I never looked twice at it. She paused. I think I need to understand why. Emily moved to the desk and began the process of securing materials, documents into the lockbox, photographs down from the wall, in careful order, the notebooks arranged for federal handoff. What's your read on why, she said. Jessica thought about it honestly. Because I was so focused on proving I belonged in the room that I stopped paying attention to what was actually in the room, she said. I was competing against Ryan, against every male officer who ever looked at me like I had something to prove, against the system that made me feel like I had something to prove. She looked at Emily. I stopped looking outward because I was completely turned inward. Emily pulled the final photograph from the wall. That's an accurate diagnosis, she said. It's also what they exploited, Jessica said. The network, the culture Ryan built. It's not coincidental, is it? A base where everyone is looking sideways at each other, measuring rank and status, and who has the right to be here. That base doesn't look down, doesn't look up, just looks sideways. That's exactly right, Emily said. She looked at Jessica directly. You just described the core vulnerability that allowed a 14-month penetration operation to run by a highly secured military installation without being detected. Jessica absorbed this. I could have seen it, she said, if I had been looking differently. Maybe, Emily said, or maybe not. These networks are sophisticated, but the culture made it easier. That's the point. She paused. The culture is not just a morale problem. It's a security problem. Every base in this system that runs on ego and intimidation is a base that has strategic blind spots. The enemy knows that. They look for it. Jessica said quietly, I've been part of building that culture here. Yes, Emily said, not unkindly, just accurately. What do I do with that? Emily looked at her for a moment, then she said, you already started doing it. Tonight, in the mess hall when you picked up the papers, in the corridor when you told Ryan what he needed to hear, in the server room when you stood at that door and held your position. She paused. You don't undo what you've done by feeling bad about it. You undo it by doing differently, consistently for a long time in ways that are sometimes costly. Jessica nodded slowly. There are female recruits coming to this base in 6 weeks, Emily said. 16 of them, junior enlisted. They're going to walk into an environment that has spent years telling people like them that belonging here is something you have to earn from people who have already decided you probably can't. She held Jessica's eyes. That can change, or it can stay the same. And the difference between those two outcomes is mostly going to be about what officers like you decide to do with what you know. Jessica looked at the now bare wall where the operational diagram had been. Is this part of the Black Dragon protocols, she said. The culture work. It's the part that matters most, Emily said. The tactical skills, those can be trained in weeks. The culture, she paused. Culture takes years to build and years to dismantle. And the only way to change it is one decision at a time from people who are willing to make the decision when it costs them something. She picked up the lockbox. You have the rank and the history and the credibility on this base to make those decisions. Whether you do is entirely up to you. Jessica said, I'll do it. Emily looked at her. I know that sounds like the thing a person says in a moment like this, Jessica said. I'm saying it anyway, because I need to hear myself say it. She paused. And because you deserve to hear it from me, even if it doesn't mean much yet. Emily looked at her for a long moment. It means something, she said. Keep it. She carried the lockbox out of the supply management office and down the corridor toward the federal handoff point, and behind her the office was empty for the first time in 6 weeks. Stripped back to what it had been before she arrived. A supply room. A door that nobody looked twice at, a space that had contained for 6 weeks the architecture of an operation that would never appear in any public record. At 0522, the storm finally broke completely. The clouds separated and the sky above Fort Blackridge went the particular dark blue of a Texas morning in the hour before dawn, and the air smelled of wet earth and ozone and the specific freshness of a night that had been through something and come out the other side. Lucas Reed stood on the east building steps, again dry now, watching the sky. He had called his mother at 0400 too early, but she answered on the second ring, the way mothers answer calls at 4 in the morning, with the specific alertness of someone who has never fully stopped listening for the phone. He had told her Aaron was fine, was coming home. 30 days leave. She had cried. He had let her. Then he had sat on the steps and watched the sky lighten by degrees. At 0530, a helicopter appeared on the eastern horizon, not a military transport configuration. Smaller, faster. The kind of aircraft that doesn't file a standard flight plan and doesn't appear on base traffic control unless the base traffic control officer has been specifically instructed to log it and then specifically instructed to unlog it. Lucas watched it come. It landed in the south exercise field, which was large enough and which nobody was currently using. Emily Carter came around the corner of the east building with a single duffel bag over one shoulder and the lockbox in her other hand, moving with the same quiet, purposeful efficiency she had brought to every moment of the last 10 hours. Lucas stood up. She stopped when she saw him. They looked at each other across the wet pre-dawn air. You're leaving, he said. Yes. Is there anything? He stopped. Started again. Is there anything I can do after going forward? Emily set down the duffel. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and pulled out a card. Plain white. No logo. A single string of digits that was not a phone number in any standard format. She held it out to him. He took it. That is a contact sequence, she said, not mine directly, a relay point. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you see something that doesn't add up, something in your chain of command, something in your unit, a pattern that other people are looking sideways at instead of looking at directly, you send a message through that sequence. 2 words. Fort Blackridge. That's it. Someone will respond within 48 hours. Lucas looked at the card, then at her. You're recruiting me. I'm leaving you a door, she said. Whether you ever knock on it is entirely your decision. The door has no obligation attached to it. He looked at the card for a long moment, turned it over, blank on the back. He put it in his breast pocket. Private reads, she said. He looked up. You held her documents. In a room where 300 people were making a different choice. You held them because it felt wrong not to. That instinct. She paused. Don't let this place train it out of you. Lucas said, I won't. She picked up the duffel. Ryan Cole came out of the East building at that moment, still in the clothes he had worn all night, moving with the kind of exhausted uprightness of a man who has been through something that rearranged him and is still figuring out how to hold a new shape. He stopped when he saw the helicopter on the south field, looked at Emily and the duffel. He walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away. He said, I want to tell you something that's true. She waited. I spent 4 years on this base believing that the strongest person in the room was the one who made everyone else smaller, he said. I believe that completely. It was my entire operating model. He paused. Tonight you walked into a room where I was the most powerful person and you let me do everything I thought made me powerful and none of it touched you. And the reason it didn't touch you, he stopped. His jaw worked. The reason it didn't touch you is because you were never trying to be the most powerful person in the room. You were trying to do the thing that needed doing, and those are completely different goals. And I built my entire career on the wrong one. Emily looked at him. I don't know how to undo 4 years, he said, but I know what I'm going to point myself at going forward. And it's not the same direction. Emily said, the soldiers in this base trusted you with their development. Some of them are worse for that. That's real, and you're going to have to carry it. She paused. But you can also change what that means going forward. The question is whether you do it because it's the right thing or because tonight humiliated you into it. Ryan held her eyes. Both, he said, honestly. Right now, it's both. I think the humiliation fades, and what's underneath is something I actually believe. But I'm not going to claim I'm there yet. That's honest, she said. Yeah, he said. I'm working on that too. Emily picked up the lockbox. She looked at Ryan, then at Lucas, then at the East building behind them where Nathan Hayes was still working, where Jessica Monroe was doing whatever the next thing was, where 4 contractors were being processed, and a colonel was writing out a full confession that would take the rest of the morning. She said, a military destroyed by ego collapses long before the enemy attacks. I need you both to remember that, not as a lesson from tonight, as an operating principle going forward. She looked between them. Because the next time a gap opens up in this culture, there will be someone waiting to walk through it. And the difference between that working and not working is exactly what you decide to do with what you know right now. She turned and walked toward the helicopter. Lucas watched her go. Ryan stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Ryan said quietly, she knew we'd be standing here when she came out. Yeah, Lucas said. She probably knew that around the time she walked in the mess hall door. Ryan said nothing, stood with that. The helicopter lifted at 0541. It rose clean and fast and banked southeast, and within 90 seconds it was a shape against the lightning sky, and within 3 minutes it was gone. It absorbed into the blue dark air, the way things disappear when they were designed to disappear completely, without remainder, leaving only the fact of what they had done behind them. Lucas Reed stood on the wet ground of Fort Blackridge with a plain white card in his breast pocket and a cousin who was coming to home in 30 days leave and a daughter 8 months old waiting to learn his face. And he thought about what Emily had said. Don't let this place train it out of you. He looked at the sky where the helicopter had been. He thought, I won't. Across the base, the lights of Fort Blackridge came on building by building as the morning watch rotation began. Mess hall administrative wings training facilities, barracks, the ordinary machinery of military life, starting up again like a thing that didn't know what had moved through it in the night. But it had moved through it, and the people standing in its wake were not the same as the people who had been there before. Ryan Cole would be demoted before the week was out, and he would accept it without contest, and he would spend the next year doing the hardest thing he had ever attempted. Not a combat operation, not a field exercise, not a leadership test designed by anyone else, but the internal work of dismantling a version of himself he had built so carefully for so long that he had forgotten it was a version and not the truth. Jessica Monroe would meet the 16 female recruits 6 weeks later, and she would stand in front of them without performing strength and without managing distance, and she would say simply and directly that she was there to help them become what they were capable of, and she would mean it, and some of them would know immediately that she meant it, and that would be enough to begin. Nathan Hayes would spend 4 months working through the intelligence gathered from Mercer's notebook, and the arrested contractors and the 3 additional network nodes would be dismantled entirely, and 14 operators in the field would come home to their lives, and one of them would meet his daughter for the first time in a house in Georgia on a Tuesday afternoon, and she would look at him with the specific solemn attention of a child who has not yet learned not to see people clearly. And then she would reach for him, and that would be the beginning of everything. And Lucas Reed would keep the card. He would not use it for 2 years. He would stay at Fort Blackridge, and he would do his work, and he would pay attention to the things that didn't add up. And mostly they would turn out to be ordinary human mistakes and bad institutional habits, and none of them would require the contact sequence. And then one day they would, and he would use it. And 2 words would travel through a relay point to a person on the other end who would read them and make a call, and another door would open in another direction. And the work that Emily Carter had spent her life doing would continue as it always had, in the places nobody thought to look and the moments nobody thought to question, carried forward by the people who had learned, sometimes at great cost, sometimes in a single night, what it actually meant to hold the line. Emily Carter was never the victim. She was never the test. She was the standard. And Fort Blackridge from that morning forward spent every day trying to meet it.